Hello everybody and welcome back for some VR First Impressions, where I spend 1 to 2 hours on some recently released games and then let you know how I feel about them. As always, I am Mateo311 and this is your channel for everything VR related. Now nothing actually blew me away this week, however, these were all good games. They're just not my go-to genres. I jumped into a game and I'm like, oh, this is good, the graphics are great, this is fun, the controls are cool. I was excited across the board. I was surprised on a lot of the titles because they differ mechanics than I was expecting. So overall, it's a good week. And if these are your type of games, you should be pretty excited. Now, there are, of course, links and timestamps if you want to skip ahead. But let's just start off with the game that I liked the least. Since nothing really released in the first week of July, I jumped back to some older titles that I missed, and the first one was Breath Edge Cosmic Cluck. I thought this was some sort of quirky story-driven experience, but this is actually an open-world survival title, similar to something like Subnautica. Now, instead of crash landing into the ocean though, you're actually in a spaceship that gets shot down, and you're now floating around in space, and you'll have to just escape out into a debris field and look for supplies. So it was actually pretty cool. What I wasn't the biggest fan of was like the humor aspect of it. You have this quirky flying duck creature with some type of contraption on its head. I found it to be useful and comical at times, but also very, very annoying. The thing just doesn't shut up, and sometimes you have to whack it in the head, which was funny like once or twice, and then it's like, all right, whatever. It just keeps asking to be whacked in the head. Ultimately, though, it comes down to the mechanics, and this is where the game's solid. You float out into space, it looks really good, there's a bunch of things to find, and that familiar survival, just, you know, navigate around, collect things, try not to take on too many risks, watch your oxygen, you know, that perfect combination comes to fruition, and it's a fun game. Like, generally, I don't spend time in survival titles. That's just not for me, but the clock just kept ticking down, time went by and by. I looked down and I said, oh, I've actually been in this game for an hour now. I think I have an understanding of what it's all about. Again, survival titles are not my bread and butter, not my go-to, not a game I seek out, but this is definitely fun, and something about doing it in VR makes it more enjoyable than when I play those games on flat screen. Now, it's hard for me to say, go out and buy this game, it's awesome, because like I said, not my preferred genre. But if this is the style of game you enjoy, go ahead and check it out. Give it an hour or two, and if it's not for you, utilize Meta's return policy. Now, our next title is Stilt, which is also a few months old. However, when it comes to the MetaQuest version, it's only available on App Lab right now, so you can basically consider this in a beta state. This is probably the one game on today's list that surprised me the most. It immediately drops you into a beautiful cartoon world with graphics that were surprisingly impressive. For an App Lab title, it's definitely not giving off any sort of beta feel, and what intrigued me the most is the fact that we rarely ever get to play a platformer from the first-person perspective. The game honestly felt like I was physically dropped into Mario, or in VR terms more like Max Mustard. You had that brightly lit, beautiful cartoon world all around you, and you're jumping around, and it also utilized a really cool mechanic where you're this alien creature with springs for hands. It's a little bit reminiscent of something like Gorilla Tag, but you're a lot more bouncy. It feels good, and it makes like looking for hidden things and collecting all the stamps, not coins in this game, it's stamps, collecting all of them that much more challenging, or at least physically exhausting. You also look extremely goofy while playing this game, as attempting to walk makes you do these big scooping like motions. Regardless, the controls feel great. Double pogo sticking throughout the world is a great way to get around. And what I immediately thought would be a game that offered up no challenge at all, does definitely ramp up the difficulty over time. Now, one of the additional features that I was really excited to try out turned out to be a bust, and that's the multiplayer mode. It looks, as of right now, there's really no community around this game. I waited 5 minutes or so here and there and just did not get connected to a session, unfortunately. I know it's still an App Lab. I hope when they make it to full release, there's a push and you get some people in the multiplayer, because I think that could be a really fun aspect of this game. All right, let's move on to another title, and this is one that you guys asked me to check out. I jumped into some motorcycle racing with VRider SBK. My expectations going in were pretty low, and it turns out I was way off. Racing games are usually all about high quality graphics and the overall feel of speed. In both cases, I was not expecting the MetaQuest to deliver, and once again, like I said, I was wrong. The game looks really good. I mean, it looks Quest good. It's not going to blow you away. It's not the most beautiful VR game you've ever experienced, but it looks good enough to feel real, to keep up the immersion, and that's all you need when it comes to a VR title. Now, when it comes to those racing mechanics and the overall feel, yeah, you definitely feel the speed. You'll feel it right in the tutorial. And the game makes you utilize steering mechanics like this. You're going to tilt your body. They recommend you sit in a chair and physically, tilt back and forth, which took a minute to get used to, maybe a little bit longer than a minute, but it feels really good. I was over leaning or under leaning a lot. Maybe I was getting a little lazy and didn't want to fully lean, or I was like, oh, I'm going slightly too far off track. Let me lean. And then, I leaned way too much. So it does take a little while to get used to, but it feels great. And, you might see the helmet in some of the footage and be like, oh, that's annoying. You could turn it off. There's lots of different options. They can make it go from basically like training wheels. The game will completely gear shift you and everything. You could use the trigger for acceleration, the trigger for brake, or you could use a twisting motion for the throttle. So there's plenty of options, lots of different race modes. And like I said, it just feels and looks good. So if you're into racing titles, especially motorcycle ones, yeah, put this on your list. Highly recommended, even though I'm not a racing fan. My only overall concern with this one would be longevity, as I have no idea if this will keep you hooked in for an extended period of time. And finally on today's list is probably the biggest release, Riven. Now, I have a lot to say about this game. Again, another genre that I definitely don't gravitate to. I played the titles when I was young. In the 90s, I played Myst and Riven years ago, and I would constantly get stuck and frustrated, and they weren't for me back then, and they're still not really for me now. I feel like I have a bit more patience though, and I was able to spend the hour plus kind of just wandering around, repeating my steps, and slowly making progress without getting frustrated. Now, these games are also supposed to be about the beauty of these fantasy environments. This, unfortunately, is where the Quest version goes a little bit sideways. While it is a really good looking game, it suffers from a bunch of graphical anomalies and performance issues. Overall, it feels like the Quest version needed a little bit more time to cook. When I first got into the game, I said, oh, this looks pretty good. And then when you see a character up close, the character himself looked really good, but his hair was absolutely terrible. It was dying for anti-aliasing. It was the most pixely, weird mess ever, and it just totally broke the immersion. Then you get into game and you see the world that you're going to be exploring for the first time, and you say, you know what, this looks really good. However, there's tons of texture popping. There's issues with foveated rendering, and there's also a bunch of hitching. So it's not like the FPS drops. It's like the FPS goes to 0 for a second or two, and then you pop a few inches forward in a few areas. It's not constant. It doesn't happen like all the time or even frequently, but there's a few rooms that you go from, this room to that room, and it happens continually. And it's like, this is where they needed to clean things up. But overall, it's a really solid game. If you like this style, if you like Myst, if you like that exploration where nobody holds your hand, nobody gives you a hint, you're on your own. Just figure it out. And sometimes it can be so obvious right in front of your face what you need to do, but you miss it like 15 times. You got to look at this world logically and walk through it, and then sometimes it goes completely illogical. And I honestly feel like I didn't make a lot of progress in an hour, but I still enjoyed it. I think it's a great game, and I just wish they would have given it a little bit more time to iron some things out. So if you were a fan of their previous game Myst, or you just love puzzle exploration titles, you should enjoy this one. If you do happen to be on the Quest though, you might want to give it some time so they can iron out some of these bugs, and you'll get to play through an experience that doesn't frequently break the immersion. And that was today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Like normal, let me know your feedback about these games, about the overall video. I love hearing it. Also, if there's other titles you want me to cover in future videos, list those too. As you see, I had to go back in time for a couple titles on this one, the backlist, which is huge, but I want to hear which ones you guys want covered. And again, if you enjoyed it, thumbs up. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. And as always, I'll see you guys on next time.